Thank you. Well, Colorado.
Yeah.
Colorado happened and my phone started ringing. And people were very, very concerned. And the question was, David, how are we going to be okay? Trump's not going to be on the ballot. And how are we going to get Trump? And it wasn't just that, it was other things, but that was generally the gist of the phone conversation. So I've done 2 shows already, and if you go to my Facebook page, you can look them up. One is from our friends David Van and Eddie Huff from Fresh Black Coffee. So it's freshblack.coffee is their website, and you can find the show that David and I did over the holidays, kind of laying out some of the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight. And then just Monday, I did a show with a gal out of Florida on Blogspot Radio, and talked for 2 hours, and then did another hour offline, but it'll be on there if you go to American Statesman on Blogspot Radio. Again, go to my website or my Facebook page, and you can find the links either under Constitutional Grounds or under David Oldham, and you can find those links. Good discussions all. We're going to cover even some more stuff, some other stuff. So if you kind of go through it all, it's a lot, it's several hours worth of stuff, but if you go through it all, you'll get a real good handle on things election. So the question is, we've got lies. Now, I want to start the whole thing with nothing that you've been told about Colorado is correct, or from Colorado is actually lawful. There's nothing that Colorado has done that is actually lawful. Now they say it is, it's in they actually want to use the Constitution, but they are twisting the Constitution, and we're going to kind of talk about the nuances of how they're getting to where they're going. Okay, we'll cover that a little bit more. But let's look at a few of the lies. First, the biggest lie is they're keeping the presidential candidate off the ballot. That is a lie, and it's not quite the lie you think. Are the presidential candidates ever actually on the ballot? We're going to talk about that. Insurrection decided on a state-by-state basis. Second lie, right? 14th Amendment, where they're using it, we're going to cover that section here in a bit, but it talks about being guilty of insurrection, but did Donald J. Trump get a proper due process in court in Colorado to have been adjudged an insurrectionist? Or was it just a judge's opinion, just stated, and therefore stated that he can't be on the ballot, which we're going to find out, he's really not on the ballot in the first place. But then also, electors are bound to the popular vote, either nationally or even by state or district vote. Okay? That is a lie. And it is a lie perpetrated by Oklahoma because we have what are called binding laws. And people think that they are legitimate, but even the Supreme Court has stated on numerous occasions that the states cannot dictate to federal officers. Now, I bring up the Supreme Court, and if you know me, you know I do not look to the Supreme Court as our final arbiters of anything, because they are not. We, the people, are the final arbiters, and we have stated in the Constitution what we are agreed to. And so we are ultimately the final arbiters, but the Supreme Court gets it wrong all the time, and the state courts get it wrong all the time, and so the state legislatures as well. And so they've created these binding laws, and the Supreme Court said to Oklahoma, because we had Senator Inhofe Remember, we had term limits on for federal officers. And we said you cannot be on an Oklahoma ballot if you have been in office, in federal office, for so much time. You just are not allowed to be on the ballot. And that, we thought that was within our purview as the state of Oklahoma to dictate that, and the Supreme Court came back and said, you cannot do that. You cannot limit a federal officer. Well, binding laws do just that. So we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. And then finally, the need to prove, and this goes back to what happened in 2020, the need to prove not only fraud, but fraud in sufficient amount for election to be invalid. Okay? None of that is true. You do not need to prove fraud, because there are plenty of things in public record that do not meet the constitutional muster, and we'll cover some of those things as well. So these are the lies that are out there, and that the Colorado case is kind of hinging on. So let's look at the president or the presidential candidates on the ballot. I want to start with what is called a ticket. This, if you look up at the top, I'll go here to this one so you can see a little bit closer, was from 1864. Now, real quick history on voting in the United States. Initially, when people voted, they would get a piece of paper and they would write down names of people they wanted for office. Put it in the ballot box. They'd write it down. So every candidate was a write-in. Every candidate. We don't even allow write-in candidates in Oklahoma right now. But that's the way it started. Everybody was a write-in. And by the time we get to the roughly 1850s, 1860s, the parties, the political parties, were creating tickets, and they looked like a ticket. They were about this big, and they had all of this information on it. That was your ballot. This was not printed by the government. This was printed by the political party. And if we go back, what you will see is the one on the right or the one on the left is the front side, and has all of the candidates that they want you to vote for. It's straight line voting. And what you would do is you would take that ticket and you would put that ticket in the ballot box. That was your vote. Now, if you wanted to vote differently, you could probably write things in and so forth and still put it in the ballot box. And the history is fascinating at this time period, but pretty much everybody was voting straight line. And they were certainly trying to get them to vote straight line. And if you put this in, it counted, and everybody on that ticket got counted as a vote. So that's the way they were doing their votes. On the back side, note that the party thought it was very important on this one to put the times of the polls being open. It was one day, and they printed that they're open from 8 until 4:30. And that's when the polls were open. So I want you to see, this is from Massachusetts. The election of 1864. Who's running for re-election that year? Does anybody know?
Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln. Guess whose name does not appear on this ticket anywhere? No, right up here at the top, it says, for presidential electors. And it lists the at-large electors. And we're gonna look here in a minute why they're listed this way. But there's at-large electors, and then there's the districts. So this would be the senatorial at-large electors, and then one from each congressional district, representing each congressional district. So that is who's on this ballot. There is nobody else. Now, 1864, I believe, again, Ohio put the names of the president and vice president on their ticket plus the electors. kind of like what Oklahoma has on our ballots now, because you will see the names. You'll see Donald Trump and his running mate, and then underneath it you will see a line with all of the electors' names. And so, and in reality, the only people you're voting for are the electors, because there literally are 535 people that vote for the President of the United States, and that is all. There are no other people that actually vote for the President of the United States. It's a tremendous honor. I was honored in 2016 to be the elector, but I want you guys to know that this club has the last 3 electors for this district. And that is, Rhonda was last time in 16, and before that, Larry Williamson was elector for this district. And all three of us, work with this club quite readily. And there is no other club that has the membership doing all of that is so working so hard and always working together. Even though we participate in other clubs, this is kind of like the core. So the president is elected by the Electoral College. And let's also, just in case anybody might have a problem with the word college, the word college does not appear in the Constitution. It means a group of people set to a particular task. And it was used at the time, and so they called it the Electoral College, but they never used that in the Constitution. Now, I'm going to just kind of go through the lies, and then I want to go into the Constitution, what it says about elections, because you will very quickly see what I'm talking about. So first off, insurrection decided on a state-by-state basis. Can that work? No. Not when it's a federal offense and it's done in D.C. How can Colorado be doing something that happens somewhere else, right? The problem here is Colorado, what was the judge deciding? Whether Trump was going to be on the ballot. Well, wait a minute, if he's not really on the ballot, if his name just appears, but we're not really electing Trump, and you'll see in the Constitution, nobody ever elects a president. You elect electors, the voters elect electors, and they elect the president. And then if the electors cannot be bound to a popular vote, if they cannot be bound to vote a particular way by the state in which they reside, because they are working a federal office, they're holding and exercising a federal office, so the state doesn't have any authority over that. And if the state doesn't have any authority over that, then what the judge decided does not matter. Okay? It just doesn't matter. It's all smoke and mirrors. Now, it's even worse in Florida, because in Florida, they don't even let you know who your electors are on the ballot. They just put up the names of the president and vice presidential candidates and their respective parties, and say there's a slate of people out there nominated by the governor to represent them. And then they have these binding rules, and they literally say that if you change your vote from the way that you were elected against, to somebody other than you by oath promised to represent, then you tender your resignation and you're replaced immediately. Now, and it is considered that your resignation has been tendered, okay, and accepted. In Oklahoma, you are removed. So if I were to have changed my vote in 16, then I was supposed to have been removed and somebody put in my place, but my alternate didn't show up, so I don't know who they would have used. But Mary Fallin, who was governor at the time, was extremely nervous. I mean, like, unusually nervous about somebody changing their vote. Unusually nervous. And that partly goes to the way that she was running the Electoral College meeting here in Oklahoma, and that we really didn't take a vote. She just said, is anybody changing their votes? And then she printed out a paper saying that we voted, and then we all signed it. And that was it. So, and Texas is completely different. They actually take over the Senate chamber for a day, and everybody sits down, they elect a chairman, and they, they do a whole thing. So, no, they're a lot bigger. We had 7, they have 40, so, or something around there. So, 30 some odd. So it's considerably different. Now, let's go to Florida, and let's look at what the argument of the rhinos and Democrats in Florida is that Trump, first off, you have to assume that Trump has led an insurrection. And because they assume that he has led an insurrection, the 14th Amendment, Section 3 says no person shall be a senator or a representative in Congress or elector of president or vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States, who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States, has if they have sworn to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same. So that is what it's saying, and it says, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof, but Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So even if he were convicted, it could be removed by Congress. What is conspicuously missing? This is the entire section. What is conspicuously missing from this? President. Well, no, that would be covered under a hold any office, civil or military. No, what is conspicuously missing is how we're going to enforce it. You got to be charged. You got to have due process of law, unless there's an impeachment and a trial in the Senate. But you can't really do that if you're not president. But there has to be some mechanism by which this would be enforced. And Congress has never taken that up, to my knowledge. Be interesting to ask the congressman if there has been something to this, because there were people in the South at the time of this writing that they wanted to make sure never had a chance to get back in until they had shown their loyalty and would never have a chance to serve in any position governmental without Congress actually removing that disability. And there were some that did.
In fact, members from the South were prohibited from serving in Congress.
Right, because of this section. And unless Congress were to remove the disability. And again, that would be fascinating history to look into. I have not done so, but that would be fascinating to look into. So that is the crux of their argument. He's an insurrectionist, therefore he cannot serve. Well, Colorado doesn't have the ability to dictate to every other state, so they start making up things for them to do to how can we as little Colorado keep Trump from taking office again? Well, we're going to declare him an insurrectionist. We're going to give an appearance of putting him up before a judge. We're going to have a judge decide, all outside of real due process, and then we're going to have them just make this decision and call him an insurrectionist and keep him off the ballot. But if the electors are who elects the president, can you keep the electors from re-electing him? And the actual answer is no, except for binding laws. Okay, those binding laws, those sticky binding laws that everybody wants to get into. Now they say you need to prove not only fraud, but in sufficient amount, but for the election to be invalid. But it says in the 14th Amendment, Section 2, just right above that, it says representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed. But when the right to vote at any election for the choice of electors for president and vice president of the United States, representatives, Congress, and lists a bunch of people, is denied to any, and it says of the male inhabitants of such state, where it says of the male inhabitants, just put in qualified voters or qualified electors, because future amendments, the 19th Amendment allows women to vote, the 26th Amendment reduces the age to 18, the 15th Amendment guarantees former slaves the absolute right to vote, and the now I'm going to get it wrong. The 24th Amendment allows you to vote without a poll or any other tax getting in the way of your right to vote. And so you have a lot of things. So if any qualified voter of the United States is denied or in any way abridged except for participation in rebellion or other crime, the basis for representation therein shall be reduced in the proportion which the number of such qualified voters shall bear to the whole number of qualified voters 18 years of age or older. Okay? So, that is the standard. Now let me break it down for you real fast. What it means is if you run an election that cheats in some way, and it abridges the rights to vote for some to their positive, some to their negative, then you have abridged how many people's right to vote? Everybody's. So if you have abridged everybody's right to vote, it says the basis for your representation shall be reduced to the number of which are abridged. What's it says? Representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers. If you abridge 100%, you reduce your numbers by 100%, meaning you get what? No representation. That's what this says. So, it was that important at the time of right after the Civil War, because that's when the 14th Amendment came in, that there was going to be no cheating and there was going to be no keeping people from being able to vote. And that was rampant at that point, okay? And I'll get into some things that show that it goes all the way back. But but it was rampant, and so that was the solution. So we're going to look at it a little bit more, but was that not the solution for January 6th? And do we have to look for fraud to find it? Or can we figure it out because there were only Zuck boxes where? There were rules that were created for COVID that were not passed by the legislature of the state. There were all sorts of things that were used that did not comport to a lawful election. So the elections were run unlawfully. So what happened? Everybody was abridged, one way or another, because they generally abridged. It was generally these rules were to abridge, and especially to abridge toward the left. We saw it. It was all in public. You don't have to go to the fraud in proving, hanging chads or the numbers and everything like Mike Lindell was doing, or they're really communicating with the machines. You don't have to go there. All you have to go to is the states that ran elections by the rules of a judge. Georgia. A Secretary of State in opposition to their legislature, Pennsylvania. And it wasn't just red states, it was blue states that did the same thing. You have places like California. Now, note that it talks about a lot of different offices. It talks about President and Vice President of the United States. It also talks about the representatives in Congress. That's where this, and if we go back, representatives shall be apportioned. So this is your House of Representatives, your senators. What should have happened January 3rd to those people in those elections? Should they have been seated at 1 o'clock at noon on January 3rd? Because that's when Congress gets in. There should have been objections to all these delegations coming from all these states, and then they don't have representation in Congress, because that's the solution. But our Congress people don't know this section, and sadly, they really don't. Even Trump's attorney team and so forth does not know this. Nobody has talked about this that I've seen. I don't see it anywhere. But it is the answer, and that's what I was in D.C. for on January 6th. No, I did not go into the Capitol, but
Yeah, I'm wearing those forms.
and no shirt, right? I got the body for that. But that's the point. Is I was there to make sure that our elected officials did what they were supposed to do, and sadly, it didn't really happen. So, talk about a little bit more. There's two types of electors. There are your voters, and we see that in Article 1, Section 2, the first clause. It says, the House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states, and the electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for the electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. So what it means is whatever the states required for elections for the most numerous branch of their state legislature is what you had to go by. Oklahoma, our Constitution says qualifications of electors, subject to such exceptions as legislature may prescribe, all citizens of the United States over the age of 18 years who are bona fide residents of this state are qualified electors of this state. And so you see here that they are using the word elector as a voter. And that's what it says there in our statutes. It says every person who is a qualified elector, as defined by Section 1 of Article 3 of the Oklahoma Constitution, shall be entitled to become a registered voter in the precinct of his or her residence with the following conditions. Persons convicted of a felony shall be eligible to register to vote when they have fully served their sentence. So really, anybody who's fully served their sentence, probation, incarceration time, whatever it is, once you come to that end, you can vote next day. I have heard people think that you have to double it. So you have to take the length of your sentence, then you have to add that, then you can get your voting back. That is, I put this up here just to dispel lies that I've heard, and it's not true. Under our statutes, you can vote the day after you are fully done paying back your debt to society. Back in history, North Carolina Constitution said all freemen of the age of 21 years who have been inhabitants of any one county within the state 12 months immediately preceding the day of any election and shall have paid public taxes shall be entitled to vote for members of the House of Commons for the county in which he resides. That's December 1776, the first Constitution of North Carolina. So a lot of these you'll see, this is Virginia in June of 1776. Their constitution said that elections of members to serve as representatives of the people in assembly ought to be free, and that all men having sufficient evidence of permanent common interest with and attachment to the community have the right of suffrage. Then New York, June of 1770, or you know what? They actually were 1777. I put the wrong date down. But that every male inhabitant of full age who shall have personally resided in one of the counties of the state for 6 months immediately preceding the day of election shall at such election be entitled to vote for the representatives of said county in assembly, if during the time aforesaid he shall have been a freeholder, possessing a freehold of the value of 20 pounds within the said county, or have rented a tenement therein, an apartment, therein of the yearly value of 40 shillings and has been rated and actually paid taxes to this state. So they put a taxation amount as a minimum in order to vote. So that was the requirement in New York at that time. What we see through a lot of the constitutional amendments is the federal Constitution, being supreme, Article 6, says that when they came up with fewer requirements, that the states had to drop the things like the taxes and things like that, those requirements. Presidential electors, the difference is, it says in Article 2, Section 1, that the state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress, but no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. So our congressman could not be an elector. And that goes to the principle that you cannot hold two offices in separate branches at the same time. Some states actually stated that. There was a constitutional amendment to put that into our Constitution, but it did not pass. It was thought to be unnecessary because that just doesn't happen that way. That's not the way it works. There's got to be this separation. We all know there's a separation, so it's just unnecessary. And unfortunately, they thought a lot of things were unnecessary, and that's why we didn't have a Bill of Rights to begin with. And they decided to go ahead and go with the Bill of Rights at least. Now, notice that this is changed by the 14th Amendment. Note that we covered Section 2 of the 14th Amendment, and it says that voters have the right to vote for presidential electors. Okay? And so that, I don't think it was intentional, but the wording caused a change in how electors could be chosen. It had pretty much gone to vote by then anyway, and just about every state had gone to voting for presidential electors, rather than having them appointed by a legislature or something like that, okay, which is the way it began. The 14th Amendment did make that change, and it went on and made other changes, or actually there were other changes, and we're going to look at it right here in the 12th Amendment. First, let's look at Article 2, Section 1. The next clause says, the electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for two persons, of whom one at least shall not be inhabitant of the same state with themselves. So they are to vote for two persons. Quick history, 1800, the election of 1800. Bitter divide between John Adams, who is president, and Thomas Jefferson, who is vice president. John Adams represents the Federalist Party. Thomas Jefferson is a Democrat-Republican, founder of the Democrat-Republican Party. And they're bitterly opposed in some areas, namely the Alien and Sedition Acts, where Jefferson was most often in danger of arrest for speaking his mind against the wishes of the Federalist Party, and had to write under pseudonyms as Vice President of the United States. Okay? So they were at bitter odds. Well, what happened was in this election, and the reason that they were at such bitter odds but had those positions was because originally you voted for two people and the top two got the top two jobs, the president and vice president. They could be bitter enemies, and that's what happened. And they said, yeah, well, let's not do that anymore. And so bitter election in 1800, went to Congress, and Jefferson was able to pull it out and became president, served for 8 years. So they changed the wording. They say now the electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for president and vice president. And it is to be separate on separate ballots. And and it goes on and lists a number of other things. Most of the wording is the same, but there are a few small changes, mainly that you are now voting for president and vice president. It also goes into what happens if the Electoral College doesn't come to an actual majority. And that is that it describes that that the vote devolves to Congress. And the House is to decide the president, and the Senate is to decide the vice president. And now, these passages also say that the electors, the people elected by the voters, by the electors, to perform the specific task of electing the president and vice president, meet in their respective states. They then, once they have met, the paperwork is transmitted to the president of the Senate. And then the president of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the votes should be counted. Now that's January 6th, right? That's January 6th. The person having the greatest number of votes for president shall be the president. Now, I will tell you, thanks to Congressman Hearn's office, I was directed to the statutes that talk about this, and actually there is in statute exactly how a congressman or a senator objects to the Electoral College, the slate or the ballot. How do I phrase it? How do they do it? They said the certificate from a particular state that has run an illegal election. So what should happen is on that day, let's say it's January 6th. I don't know what it'll be this year because it's set by statute, and so 2025, January, whatever, after the 3rd, they will meet and open all the certificates, read them. What can happen is a House or senator, a House member or senator can actually arise and object. And there is a whole process of doing that, and it's laid out in statute, in federal code. And I did not get that, but if you want it, let me know and I'll find it for you and get it to you. So the person having the greatest number of votes for president shall be the president, if such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed. And if not, then the highest number not exceeding 3 on the list of those voted for as president, the House of Representatives shall choose immediately, meaning they go straight over and go into session, by ballot, the president. The Congress may be, now, the 12th Amendment then goes into how that is done. The House chooses the president, the Senate chooses the vice president. The Congress may determine the time of choosing of the electors, Article 2, Section 1 says, and the day on which they shall give their votes. So if you remember, I'll get to dates here in just a second. It says which day shall be the same throughout the United States. So everything's going to be uniform for the vote. And here are the dates. So we know November we choose the electors. That's by federal statute. December, the electors vote. That's when you meet in your respective states and the presidential electors vote. January 3rd, according to the 20th Amendment, that is the day that Congress is seated, that the old Congress is dissolved and the new Congress takes place at noon. January, the electoral ballots are read right in that same week that Congress is seated. January 20th, the president is inaugurated. So between January 3rd and January 20th, we have to make sure we have a president. Okay? And then the 20th Amendment also goes into what happens if we don't have a president by the time that inauguration day comes. And there's a whole rigmarole and process, and it also goes into federal statute to, what was it, designated survivor? Those laws, that's actually based on real law. And so there we have generally what happens with the election. So I hope this has been helpful. Do you see that there is nowhere in here we're actually electing directly a president of the United States? So all of this stuff in Colorado is smoke and mirrors. But it is exacerbated by these binding laws because these binding laws give the appearance that the state legislatures can force you to take an oath to vote one way and one way only. Now I ask you to put yourself in a position or in a situation. I'm going to draw a picture for you. Let's say November happens and we have the election. Great. Everybody's committed to their candidate. We've had the election. We've got the electors chosen. Okay? Fair election. Let's go with a fair election this time.
You're somewhere else.
Okay. I know. But let's just keep it all simple. Fair election, choose the electors, and then before December, the candidate who supposedly won dies or is otherwise incapacitated, can never take office. Now what? All these states have turned their electors into rubber stamps and rubber stamps only. It's why we are getting to why the national popular vote came real close to taking effect. Well, that and the junkets to the Bahamas that they were giving away here in Oklahoma, trying to force us to vote the way California, or that force our electors to vote the way California votes or New York votes. And the thing is that these binding laws are the start. And then what they will do is then they will try to force you to do something with that bind, with that having been bound, that is completely out of the realm of your thought process at this point. Okay? So first binding laws, then we're going to get you to vote blue every single time because that's the way the popular vote goes. But remember that the purpose of the Electoral College was to give the smaller and agrarian states actually a say. Because do you know how many red states there are versus blue states? There's actually more. So if everything devolves to Congress, and let's just say everybody gets seated, I forgot to put it in here, but what the 12th Amendment says is that each state gets one vote in your House and your Senate. So it doesn't matter that you might have 24 Democrats over or 40 Democrats from California. They get one vote. Oklahoma gets one vote. We're equal now, right? Their vote may go blue, but we've got more red states in Congress. When the Democrats held the House, I should say, we had more red states represented. And so we had about 35 votes, I think it was at the time, roughly. Maybe it was a little fewer than that. But we had well over half, okay? Even if we lost Colorado, they didn't go red with us, let's say, we would be fine. And so the thing is, when it devolves to Congress, everything changes. So if you look at the way this should have happened, is that because everybody got seated on January 3rd, if we have the right objections on January 6th, and Congress does their job and holds them accountable, even though they didn't 3 days before, if they then held them accountable, what would happen is it would devolve to Congress and everybody get one state, and who would be president? And that's exactly what would have happened if the supreme law of the land would have been followed. Now, you would have also seen Congress decimated. Nancy Pelosi would have been gone because California did not run a lawful election. Okay, they put Zuck boxes everywhere. Now, Zuck boxes can never be lawful in America. Why? Because we all have the same privileges and immunities, right? If we have the same privileges and immunities and Article, the 14th Amendment, Section 1 says that no state shall make or enforce any law which shall violate or abridge the rights of a citizen of the United States. So if they are accepting and running those things, they're helping some, they're hurting others. I literally had a friend in Connecticut who was told because he was refusing to wear a mask that he was not allowed to vote in his polling place. He was told they would work with him and they would bring a police officer who was at his polling place for some strange reason. They would bring a police officer out. He could fill out his ballot on the curb. The police officer would deposit it in the box for him, don't you know? That was their compromise. But do you know what was going on in urban Connecticut, Hartford, and other places? No requirements whatsoever. No facial requirements, no nothing. Because why? They wanted those votes. Now, I don't mean to get into the motive. That's irrelevant. The point is, it wasn't run equally across the state, which abridges everybody's right to vote. Because it tilts, and we have never touched fraud, have we? Now we get into fraud, and that's a whole other story. There's really, that's the point. So we've got to work on the binding laws. We've got to get back to the spirit of what was really going on, and both the Electoral College and the devolvement into Congress is a protection on smaller states like Oklahoma. We have 4 million people, a tenth of the people, well, now a ninth of or an eighth of the people in California, because they're all leaving California. We used to be a tenth their size. We're growing, they're shrinking. But we become equal to them. They don't get to run all their numbers and get one over on us. They still have numbers and they still are entitled to their votes, but their votes are equalized very much by the Electoral College. Now, we have to get rid of the binding laws because the binding laws are the way they're going to force us into democratic vote. One person, one vote, national popular vote. Hey, I'm in Los Angeles and my vote isn't being counted properly. I'm being abridged because of the Electoral College. And that's what they're saying. That's not quite the way they're phrasing it, but that's what they mean. And the thing is that we can't allow that to happen. But how are they going to get us there? Binding laws first, and then bind us to those supposed oaths. But you're not making a valid oath, a valid contract, when it's forced. Okay? And this is being...
Are they making changes? Are they challenging the binding laws anywhere?
The Supreme Court just this year re-upheld that binding laws are okay by them.
Amazing.
So the point is that you cannot trust the Supreme Court to do that which is lawful. They will just go off and do whatever they want to do every time. Look at the abortion. Okay? It's not that babies have a right to life. States get to take a vote on it. Okay? That's how bad it is. And so it's so with this. You never see it. I mean, George Washington was elected unanimously and so forth, but those people were assigned their job as electors in 1789, and they got together and they made up their own minds as to who they were going to elect. Now, it's vital, given, if you go back to my scenario, what if your guy dies in between? You've got to have chosen the right elector who can actually know who the other players are to get us the best president, right? Somebody who's not going to pull a Hitler and throw out the Constitution and create his own law. So the elector position is actually vital. They do one thing one day. It's not that big a deal in that sense, but you do have to choose somebody that you can trust should the worst happen. And it should always be that when we're electing somebody, we should always be choosing somebody like that. So with that, I hope that I have covered it all, but if not, please, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.